Welcome back, and in this episode we're going to be taking a look at why and how I created this unusual oil painting. Also, the importance of the texture in this painting and some of the tools that I actually used to create the painting itself, plus the materials, oil paints, why I absolutely love and hate them. And then finally, this lovely lady, artist Nancy Kaminsky from the 1970s, a TV artist who inspired me to start painting as a child. Now, I did put out a little teaser of this painting going back a little while ago. It's an oil painting, which for me is quite unusual. And I did this particular painting back in 2013, as I've just looked at. So it's an oil painting on board. Obviously, it's an abstract oil painting. To give you an idea of the size, it is 16 inches by 12 inches. So it's just on a standard kind of board canvas. And I hadn't done any oil work before. I've been painting a long time. I think I've been painting, well, best part of 30 years actually when I come to do this. And one of the reasons I actually come to do this painting was I was having an operation and I was going to take me quite a long while to recuperate from it. So I thought I'll get myself some oil paints to try just to see how I kind of got on with those. And so that was going to be my little mission during my recovery. One thing I didn't really bank on was the fact that I'd actually be using the oil painting to distract myself from the pain after the operation. So for a good couple of weeks, I was in quite significant pain, unfortunately, and it wasn't great. So after a couple of days of a bit of unpleasantness, I decided, right, okay, crack out the oil paints, and I'm going to use this as a way to distract myself. So I actually painted standing up. So I had an operation on my stomach, so I couldn't really sit down very comfortably. So luckily I had a desktop easel, so I could stand up and paint. So pop this on there. So basically with this canvas, I'm using oil paints, which I've never used before. Now the brand I used was, I'm going to say confidently, Daler-Rowney, which is a UK brand. One of the reasons I used those, I'd used other Daler-Rowney products and was very happy with those. So I thought I would have a crack at the oil paints. Now, I didn't actually know much about oil paints. Now, these particular ones I chose were their Georgian range, which might seem a bit odd actually. Now, I chose those because I liked the colours, intensity of them. In hindsight, it was a very odd selection to choose that range because Georgian, obviously more traditional kind of types of oil paints and the tones and things. So a few people afterwards said to me, why did you use those? And to be honest, it was probably just blissful ignorance because it was a name I was kind of familiar with the brand, and I felt kind of happy using that with the quality. So I went with Daler-Rowney Georgian oil paints on these ones. So as you can see, the colours are very intense. So the process I actually used to do this painting was I always underpaint, oil paints especially, I'll underpaint the whole thing with a base colour. And this is something I learned long ago. And I actually learned that from a very interesting lady that you might be familiar with, especially if you're in the States and of a certain age. There's a very famous online TV painter actually called Nancy Kaminsky. Now Nancy, back in the 70s, she used to do a lot of tutorials on television, and she was a very interesting lady actually. I did get to know her in her later life, but basically she used to live in Italy while she was actually doing the recording. So she'd fly to the UK, do the recordings not far away from here actually in Bristol, Westwood TV, then fly back to Italy where she lived. But what she always used to do is underpaint. She always used to say, underpaint your canvas. She used to use, I think, like a beige or even like a slightly off-white kind of thing. I tend to use more of a kind of a yellow, so I might use like a lemon yellow, mix it with a white to give it a bit of a kind of a lemony tinge. And the reason I do that, and the reason she also taught everybody to do that, was twofold really. One of the main ones is if you've covered the whole canvas to start off with, it's a psychological thing, and that you're not sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, I've got to cover the whole of this canvas up, I don't know where to start. So that was the first thing. You cover the whole thing to begin with, you've got over that immediately. And the other thing is, I'm just a bit blank here, so my cat is chewing on some food here very loudly up his bowl, it's putting me off. And the other reason is it also brings out the colour intensity of the colours that you're going to layer on top. So, for example, these the reds and the yellows and the greens, whatever. If you've underpainted them with quite like a luminous colour underneath, it's going to really push that colour to the forefront after you've actually put that layer on. It's going to shine, so it's almost like having a light behind it shine through. So it is going to make quite a difference to the overall look of the thing. So that's how I come to paint it. Now, when I actually do the base layer, I will actually use a palette knife. So this is my trusty palette knife. And again, Nancy always used a palette knife. She used to use quite a large one, I think. And don't be too precious when you're putting the paint on. I don't put it on particularly thick when I'm putting a base layer on this, to be honest. As long as the actual canvas is covered, I'll be quite happy with that. And you should let it dry. Me being the impatient soul that I am, never ever waited for anything to dry. And this brings me on to the point about oil paint, which I love and which I hate. But for those of you who use oils, you'll know what's coming up. But so I do like a base layer, and then generally I would tend to paint straight on top of that. Let it dry just for a little bit, it'd still be tacky, and then I'll start the painting on top of that. Now, one of the things I will actually do, I do like to use a texture canvas. So I don't know if you can see on this, so it's going to pick it up. The canvas has got a very, very slight texture on this. And I actually like using that for a couple of reasons. One of the main ones is the fact that when you're actually pressing the paint on with your palette knife, you're actually pushing it into those peaks and troughs. So it does actually make sure not only that everything's covered, but when you actually come to put the paint on, it gives you a very nice kind of textured effect. So where it is raised, you'll actually see the layer thinner, and where it's deeper, you'll actually see the paint darker. So depending on how you press your knife onto the actual canvas, you can get very different effects. When I'm doing that with this particular one, I also use another additive. Now, before I started doing oil paintings, I did read a fair bit, and everybody was saying about how you can dilute your oils to use linseed oil or lots of the other different additives. I wasn't really too keen on doing, obviously being a novice in the way to start, but I did discover a very good product, and it's called Liquin. Now, annoyingly enough, because I haven't used it for such a long time, I haven't actually got any, but it comes in like a sort of 100 ml pot. I'm sure you can get it in the States, you can get it most places. Liquin, it's Liquin, Liquin. And what it is, it's a kind of a brown translucent liquid, and you can actually use it with the oil paint to dilute the oil paint. And not only does it do that, it actually makes your paint dry quicker, which is something that's quite important. It's quite important to me. So what I would actually do is I'd put a blob of Liquin onto my palette here. I always use these disposable palettes, which are kind of quite good actually. So normal palettes are okay, but they do tend to get quite messy. Some people love them. I tend to use these disposable ones. And they keep the paint wet for a long time, especially oils. They keep wet for a long time. If you've got ever got paint on palettes like that, and you kind of mid paint, and you've got a mix that you want to keep, always cover it. In the UK, we say cover it with cling film, which is like a see-through food paper on a roll. I think in America it's called Saracen wrap, something like that. Not too sure, but it's a see-through food wrap for preserving food. Cover that with your paint, cover your paint with it, and it'll keep it nice and fresh. But these are great, these palettes. You get about 20 on a pad, and just kind of disposable. So yeah, pop a bit of Liquin on there, and then pop your paint on there. Give it a good old mix with your palette knife and mix it all in. And basically that's all I did. So I usually put a blob of that primary colours on. I always use primary colours. If you know about my work, you'll see the colours are quite, I say quite samey. They're not really samey, but I use the primary colours and then mix them actually on the painting. It's very rare that I actually mix anything on the palette. Just not my kind of thing. I prefer putting them onto the actual canvas, seeing how the thing evolves. And then especially when I'm using a knife on the painting like this, if I can spread it around and you find the colours intermixed, then you can get these really lovely effects. So when I'm doing something like this kind of blending, I'll be pressing in quite hard with my knife. So I'll be pressing less and less there, pressing harder as it comes out, and then blends in with the layer underneath. One of the other methods I've actually used on this side here, and what I've used there, I'll put blobs of paint actually on the canvas, and then what I'll do, instead of mixing the whole thing across, spreading it across, I'll dab it. So what actually happens there, because you've got this flat bit of your knife there, and you're actually dabbing on to the paint that's already on there, it's going to be picking up the paint that's already on the canvas. Some of it's going to be sticking to the underside of your knife. And obviously that is going to carry on each time you put it on the canvas. It's going to be dispensing some of that paint onto the canvas and picking up others. So what happens is you're going to get a mix like this we see down here, which is quite nice. And obviously the viscosity, which is quite a long word, there's basically the thickness on some of the paint is going to be different than others depending how much you've diluted it on your palette with the liquid. So somebody less, somebody more, and then it's going to pick it up easier or not, as the case may be. So it's very random when you start dabbing your knife on that, and that's the effect you get. The other effect you can get when you're doing knife painting, palette knife painting, if you've got the patience and you've got the time, is you can put your paint on quite thick. So here, for example, if I try to get that in light, you can see this part is actually raised. So that is standing proud of the canvas. So I'd actually put the peaks on there, let that dry. And with oil paints, it does take quite some time. Then I'll go back, probably some weeks later on, and then you can actually skim the top of that. So you can load up your knife underneath with a very thin layer of paint. In this case, I've done the white, and I'll just be skimming those peaks across. So my knife is only going to be touching those peaks that are raised from the canvas, and that's going to be highlighting with that white. So that's a very nice thing you can use. And again, you can see I've used the same technique down here just to highlight some of these peaks here. So there's lots of ways you can use your knife. It's up to the individual. It is trial and error, and see how you get on. Now, going back to the thing I love and I hate about oils, the thing I love about them is the fact you can mix them on the board. I mix them on the board, and you can blend. So you can blend, you can dab your knife into that canvas, and you can use it. You can use a stretch canvas, but I tend to use the boards because I need to press quite hard on some of these. So you can press onto the canvas there, and you can spread, and you can intermix those colours quite nicely with the flat part of your knife. The downside to this is that obviously the less liquid that you've got with your oil paint, the longer it's going to take. And I've done paintings where I've used neat oil. So I'm sure some of you out there who paint and think, oh my God, what's he done that for? Well, I didn't know any better really. So I just used it fresh out of the tube. And I did a couple of paints I was really, really happy with. But then, of course, to my horror, I found that they took months and months and months to dry, which is no surprise to any of you if you know anything about painting. So the liquid does speed that up quite a lot. It speeds up the actual drying, the process of like the evaporation kind of thing of the moisture. Something like this, I think even this took about 3-4 months to dry, something like that. But an oil painting to actually fully dry, I think you're probably talking 6 months to a year in some cases. You know, if you're really, really whacking it on quite heavy onto the oil, because it's just going to take a long, long time. And there's not an easy way to actually get over that if you're using regular oil paints. So in recent years, they have changed, and what you can get, and I thought I brought it down with me, I don't know what I've done with it, you can get water-based oil paints. I've tried those, and it's kind of a compromise really. You can get the same kind of effects, but in all honesty, the more you dilute it, you lose the intensity of the paint, which is a bit unfortunate. It does dry quicker, but you've lost the intensity, the vibrancy of the colour. I've found depends on the kind of paint you do. If you're doing perhaps you're a landscape person, or you want kind of those more muted kind of pastels, sky kind of colours, they probably work absolutely fine for you, and you'll find a way to do oil painting pretty fast. If you like your heavy body oil paints and the chunky kind of feel to your work, I think you're probably going to find that water soluble oils are not going to be for you. You're probably going to end up going back to your regular oils, dilute with a liquid or something like that, and you're just going to have to live with the fact it's going to take a long, long time to dry. And that's one of the reasons that I did about a dozen oils whilst I was recovering from the op. And yeah, that's what I did, but it take a long while to dry. Going back to, like I said, the reason I did it, I usually do find when I'm painting, it just takes me to another place. So any of you that paint, you'll know, once you start painting mentally, you just kind of check out of reality and go into this other kind of dimension. And that really helped me with the pain control. So I just took my mind off it completely. And I produced about 13 paintings like this that are very, very abstract. Some of them are quite heavy going, to be honest, but they kind of worked for me as almost like a therapy, I guess you could say. So this one is dated 2013. So I'll just have a final zoom in for you to have a look at that. I hope you've enjoyed having a look at this painting. I was very, very pleased with this. As with all things, some people like it, some people loathe it. So it just depends on the individual. Hopefully I produced something that somebody liked. I've not sold this painting, so I actually liked it too much. So this is kept in my own archive. So there we go. I don't think I've even got a name for it, to be honest. So there we go. Anyway, so there we go. So that was my little venture into oil paintings. So I shall finish this little video by thanking you once again. Thank you very much for joining me today. Thanks for your time. If you've made it this far to the end of the video, well done. Probably most of you have clocked out by now, be making a cup of tea, eating your dinner. So that's absolutely fine. So thanks a lot for joining me. If you want to give it a thumbs up, great. If you want to give it a thumbs down, you're more than welcome to do that. If you subscribe to the channel, even better. And I shall thank you a lot. You take care, and I shall see you in the next video. Thanks a lot for your time. Bye-bye. Just a little side note, this is an email I got back from Nancy. Back in the day, I used to send her slides of my work, and she was always very gracious and looked at the work and would comment on it, which I was always very appreciative of. So I just thought it might be poignant to include this in the video. So thanks a lot for your time, and I shall see you in the next video. You take care now. Bye-bye.